Welcome to the channel. Without any delay we jump right into our part 2 of the Revenge of the Iron-Blooded Sword Hound, and those who haven't watched the part 1, it's linked in the description. Let's dive in. Vikir entered the dungeon, noticing veins of ruby minerals throughout the area. As he ventured further, he saw light emanating from inside. He pondered, "Is that the entrance to the dungeon?" Curiosity piqued, he entered and discovered that the dungeon's interior was even brighter. The brilliance was due to mana-infused rubies emitting light. However, Vikir was not the first to enter the dungeon. Evidence of a previous adventurer lay before him, an armless skeleton, bearing stab wounds and dried blood stains. A letter was placed nearby, catching Vikir's attention. He began reading the letter. "It matters not what my name is. I shall refer to myself as Cain. I pen this missive as a cautionary tale for future generations, that they may avoid the same mistakes I made. The stone chamber within this dungeon was spoken of as a family legend. By chance, my brother Abel and I stumbled upon this place and embarked on a perilous journey through countless trials. We vanquished many monsters, reaching this very chamber in pursuit of the dungeon's final objective, a quest that held us captive for 3 long years." From the name mentioned in the letter, Vikir deduced that the skeleton once belonged to the Baskerville family, who had spent 3 years trapped in the dungeon. Within the chamber, there was a stone tablet inscribed with cryptic text. "When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. Vikir continued reading Cain's account. "My brother and I pondered over the ominous text for an eternity until we arrived at a conclusion. In our mother's womb, we were as one, but upon birth, we were separated into 2 individuals. In other words, to claim the treasure within this dungeon, we needed to become one again. This meant that one of us had to die. In a fierce battle, I ultimately killed my own brother, leaving only me in this stone chamber. Despite this, the treasure remained unattainable. I wondered, we had surely transitioned from 2 to 1, so why couldn't I seize the treasure? Disheartened, I resolved to leave this place and warn those brave enough to discover it that there is naught to be gained from this devil's den, which exists solely to torment humanity." As the letter concluded, it became evident that all their hardships in pursuit of the treasure had been in vain. Vikir mulled over the text on the stone tablet and the brothers' misinterpretation of the assignment, which ultimately cost them their lives. Suddenly, the answer struck Vikir. He realized that Cain and Abel considered themselves 2 entities, whereas the solution was far simpler. When Vikir entered through the dark passageway, he was 1, but as soon as the ruby cast a shadow upon him, he became 2. And when darkness enveloped him once more, he would be 1 again, unlocking the stone chamber's final stage. Vikir destroyed the ruby, revealing that the answer to the riddle was shadow. The cause of the brothers' demise lay in the relic of the devil's den, Beelzebub. This great monster, known as one of the 7 calamities, had plagued the continent in ancient legends. Each head of the 7 families had stepped forward to confront a devil's constellation, with the Baskerville family battling the gluttony. Beelzebub. This time, Vikir was determined to prevent the blade from claiming more lives. He unsheathed the demonic blade crafted from the devil's constellation's corpse, and its malevolent energy surged into his body. Now, Vikir was eager to test his newfound power. Vikir had initially planned to leave the dungeon, believing there was no treasure to be found. However, he suddenly felt a wave of dizziness, realizing that Beelzebub was draining his energy and demanding more. Feeling weakened, Vikir made his way out of the dungeon, hunger gnawing at him. His heightened senses, courtesy of the demonic blade, led him in the direction of something to eat. He discovered the corpse of the hellhound he had previously slain and absorbed its blood through the blade, returning to a state of normalcy. Soon after, Vikir uncovered Beelzebub's inherent ability. The monster could absorb skills from its prey. Now, Vikir could wield the abilities absorbed from the hellhound, including instant regeneration, burn injuries, and the hellhound's hemorrhage. However, when Vikir attempted to absorb the powers of Cerberus, he could only acquire 1 skill due to the creature's severe damage. Meanwhile, Beelzebub absorbed another skill from a sewer rat, giving it a total of 3 abilities. Back in Baskerville Castle, The young hounds who had completed their practical exams returned. They received rewards such as shields, swords, or necklaces made from the parts of monsters they had hunted. One monster's corpse, however, surprised everyone present. Hugo, in the castle, inquired about the young master who had brought the Cerberus corpse. The butler informed him that it was Vikir, who had accidentally crossed into the restricted area and successfully hunted a Cerberus with an 8+ risk rating. Hugo was skeptical, considering that even the knights had difficulty dealing with Cerberus. The butler clarified that the Cerberus was already wounded, and Vikir used poison on his wooden spear to subdue it. Hugo asked about the source of the poison, but the butler had no information on that matter. Hugo found it impressive, acknowledging the power of information. The butler was perplexed, as it seemed highly unlikely for a Baskerville named Van to slay a Cerberus. He raised this concern with Hugo, who replied that he was not like the previous patriarchs and did not discriminate against hounds based on bloodlines. The butler apologized, and Hugo instructed him to summon Vikir. Vikir stood before Hugo, who asked him how he managed to hunt the Cerberus. Vikir responded that he had coated his wooden spear with chocolate. Hugo realized that this was the reason Vikir had requested chocolate earlier. When Hugo questioned why Vikir hadn't answered the butler's query about killing the Cerberus, Vikir simply stated that the butler was not his master. Intrigued, Hugo asked who his master was, to which Vikir replied that he was part of a clan, and the clan master was also his master. Impressed, Hugo acknowledged that the Cerberus's corpse belonged solely to Vikir and that if Vikir had any wishes, he would fulfill them. He mentioned that Vikir had also achieved the top score in the exam. As a reward, Vikir requested access to the 10,000 epistle library. Both Hugo and the butler were shocked. Hugo informed Vikir that only the patriarch, the second in command, and direct descendants were allowed entry. Vikir replied that if he was not permitted, he would give up. Hugo granted Vikir permission and instructed him to read the Baskerville 6th technique, located within the 6th restricted deep zone of the library. Vikir was taken aback. He began to contemplate how the person who had killed him in his previous life was allowing a bastardized child like him to access the Baskerville 6th technique. In the history of Baskerville, no illegitimate child with the middle name, Van, had been allowed to progress beyond the 4th technique. Determined to surpass Hugo in this lifetime, Vikir resolved to obtain the greatest essence of Baskerville, containing the teachings of the first patriarch who had subjugated the 7 great calamities. Hugo wished Vikir good luck and expressed his anticipation for what Vikir would achieve. Vikir, in turn, thanked Hugo and vowed to exceed his expectations. Vikir entered the 10,000 epistle library and began searching for books on swordsmanship, a skill he desperately wanted to learn from his past life. Among the books, he eventually found the Baskerville's 6th technique book. Knowing that Baskervilles never allowed illegitimate children to learn beyond the 4th technique as a defense mechanism, Vikir concluded that Hugo had let him access this technique because he believed an 8-year-old like him wouldn't be able to memorize it. However, Vikir had a different purpose in mind. He was seeking something far greater than the 6th technique. He left the swordsmanship section and headed towards the dusty miscellaneous books, catching the guards by surprise. The guards offered assistance, but Vikir assured them that he had already found what he came for and intended to read other books before leaving. Unbeknownst to the guards, Vikir knew the hidden treasure among the dusty books. Vikir found a book titled, A Lurking Ambush, the basics of the first technique that Baskerville children usually overlook due to its ripped pages. To others, it seemed like a useless miscellaneous book, but Vikir recognized its true worth. In his past life, he had discovered a page from this book with Baskerville's handwriting, matching the book he now held. It contained the Baskerville's 10th technique, the missing pages of which were hidden within the 7 great families. Hugo had sent hounds to retrieve the missing pages, declaring war on the families who refused. Vikir, in his past life, had found and reclaimed all the pages, knowing their contents. However, the reward for his efforts was a shameful death. This book was the only way for Vikir to surpass the 4th technique once again. To others, it appeared as a miscellaneous book without sense, but when the missing pages were filled, it transformed into a masterpiece of knowledge. In his past life, Vikir had reached the highest level of the Graduator Aura and the fourth technique. This time, he aimed to reclaim his former power before turning 15. He spent an entire day memorizing the contents of the book, and now it was time for him to go beyond his previous self. While drawing 10 teeth was not feasible for a younger Vikir, 5 teeth were within his reach. He was ready to practice the fifth technique. Vikir began with the first technique, then progressed to the second, third, and fourth. In his previous life, the direct descendants had been hostile towards him, and being an illegitimate child had been the sole reason he couldn't advance beyond the fifth technique. This time, he envisioned his opponent, the barrier preventing his progress, as Hugo. With determination, Vikir unleashed his slashes, albeit weakly, successfully performing the fifth technique. Overwhelmed with happiness, he could have cried at the realization that he could perform the fifth technique to that extent. At a speed breaking records in Baskerville's history, a young hound's canine teeth were bared towards his master. His growth was unprecedented. With this, we are the end of our video. Comment down for the next part, and the manhwas you want the recaps.